Therefore it says, wake up, sleeper. Get up from the dead. Christ will shine on you. So be careful to live your life wisely, not foolishly. Take advantage of every opportunity because these are evil times. Because of this, don't be ignorant, but understand the Lord's will. Saints of God, my eyes have seen the glory and the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the vintage with the grapes of wrath of scorn. He hath loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. I see him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening doing dance. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamp. His day is marching on.
Welcome to Conversation with Faith Leaders. My name is Dr. Brandon A.J. Davis. I'm the founder of Conversation with Faith Leaders and Content Writing Service, and I'm the newly appointed pastor of Warren AME Church in Toledo, Ohio. And so I'm happy to be with you. It's been a long hiatus since I've been able to conduct these various conversations, and so I'm very delighted to have with me special guests who will help me to fill out a conversation in honor of the legacy of the Right Reverend Reverdy Ransom, who served as the father of the Black social gospel movement, as well as a bishop in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and one of the proponents of social change within the Black church. He was a social activist, a preacher, a pastor, a theologian, and he was also a philosopher in his own right. And so I'm very glad to have with me today the grandson of Bishop Reverdy Ransom, Mr. Curtis Ransom. I also have with me the great-great-granddaughter of Bishop Benjamin Arnett, Miss Ariel Arnett, and also the historian himself, professor at Vanderbilt University and retired historiographer of the AME Church, Dr. Dennis Clark Dickerson. And so I want you to join us today as we have a very lively discussion about this historic figure who has made tremendous contributions to American society, to the Black church, and to African Methodism itself. Please welcome my guest with me, Mr. Curtis Ransom, Dr. Dennis Clark Dickerson, and Miss Ariel Arnett. Welcome to the show. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm very glad to have all of you with me today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us. I'm excited to have this conversation. And without any delay, I would like to go ahead and get this conversation going by asking our first question. Tell us about the historical connection between you and Bishop Reverdy C. Ransom. And I'll start with Mr. Ransom himself, Mr. Curtis Ransom.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to participate today. To talk about Bishop Reverdy C. Ransom, but I also don't want to forget about Emma Ransom too, his wife, because she played a significant role and was there by his side in his life. Yes, I'm the grandson of Bishop Reverdy C. Ransom. Bishop Ransom had 12 grandchildren, and 3 of us are still alive, and I'm the youngest of the 3. And from my perspective, I remember Bishop Ransom. I was 10 years old when he passed away in 1959, but I do remember him. But I also remember him within the family. He was a beloved figure. And when you're a 10-year-old kid and you listen to the older generation talk about somebody, there was always this very, very positive conversation about him. Never, ever did I ever hear anybody say anything negative about him. When you're a kid, a young child at that time, it's really instilled within you that this was a person of greatness, and that living through his lifetime, that I know at a 10-year-old, he was a person that was significant. Now, when you're 10, you don't realize, and you put together all these things that he did in his lifetime. But as you become older and you learn about his story and his life, that and how it really impacts you. But that's just my brief introduction about myself. And as we go through this podcast, I will share with you the foundation, family foundation, the Bishop Reverdy C. and the M.S. Ransom Foundation that we set up in the year 2001. So that's
Awesome.
my introduction.
Okay, I think we just lost Ariel there for a second, so I'm going to go to Dr. Dennis Dickerson, who is a good friend of mine, a personal friend of mine, and a mentor. So I'm going to go to him. If you don't mind sharing with us your connection to Bishop Reverdy C. Ransom.
Well, I never had the pleasure of meeting Bishop Ransom, although I think Mr. Ransom, you and I are the same age. I was 10 years old when he passed away in 1959. But I do recall my mother talking about Bishop Ransom. My mother grew up at Park Place AME Church in Homestead, Pennsylvania. And her childhood pastor was the Reverend R.H. Bumry. And Reverend Bumry and Bishop Ransom were very close friends. And my mother remembered Bishop Ransom's frequent visits, not only as the presiding bishop of the 3rd Episcopal District, of which the Pittsburgh Conference, in which Park Place Homestead was and is a part, but also friendly visits between friends of Bishop Ransom coming to Homestead to see Reverend Bumry. And so he was a fairly familiar figure around that church and in the presence of Reverend Bumry, who died in 1936. So this is somewhere in the early 30s and late 1920s that my mother recalled seeing Bishop Ransom visiting in Homestead. So that's the only connection I have, that is hearing about him as a child, hearing my mother speak about his presence in her hometown. Obviously, in later years, as I studied and read, I remember the first time I read The Pilgrim of Harriet Ransom's Son. I read it in the Schomburg Library in Harlem, and of course that whetted my appetite about his life, and I've made a lifelong study and have tried to read just about everything I can get my hands on concerning him, as well as works that were written by him.
So I want to recognize Miss Ariel Arnett. She is the great-great-granddaughter of Bishop Benjamin Arnett, and she is a member of the Reverdy Ransom and Emma S. Ransom Foundation in Chihuahua Chimney Corner, also known as Wilberforce, Ohio. And so I want her. Ooh, I think we just lost her. Okay, I think we're having a connection issue. So when she comes on, we'll be able to bring her in. So with the both of you, again, this is a pleasure because Mr. Ransom, I have known of you for some time, but never had the chance to meet you. When I was a student at Allen University. Dr. Willie Anthony Sinkfield was the dean of men at Allen University, and he was also my boss. He was my work study boss. And so I worked in his office constantly. And in doing so, he gave me a copy of The Sage of Chihuahua Chimney Corner, written by Miss Annetta Louise Gomez Jefferson. And so I read the book probably about 10 times since he first gave it to me. And she and I have communicated on many occasions. As such, I've seen the pictures of Chihuahua Chimney Corner. So when I came to Payne Seminary, I found myself driving by that house and sitting when I could in the driveway of Chihuahua Chimney Corner and trying to imagine what it was like to have been there when Reverdy Ransom was alive, when Bishop Benjamin Arnett lived in that house and occupied that space. I've tried to envisage in my mind what questions I would ask this historic, towering figure because he's done so much for the Black church. So I want to jump in now and ask you, Mr. Ransom, what, in your opinion, do you feel Bishop Ransom's greatest contribution to American society was?
Wow. Well, you know, he was one of the few people that lived post-Reconstruction all the way up to the modern civil rights movement. Now, everyone knows about the modern civil rights movement, Martin Luther King and all his contemporaries, but very few people know about the individuals that built the foundation for the modern civil rights movement. And he was certainly one of those individuals along with his contemporaries. And they've kind of gotten lost in time. And that's why I'm so happy to participate in this podcast today, to be able to talk about him and the others, including Bishop Arnett, that helped build that foundation for the modern civil rights movement. Well, like I said, once again, he was, post-Reconstruction, started to get national recognition in the 1890s. And he was very, very active as a civil rights leader. And he was, from what I'm not a historian, I'm not a theologian. So, but he was considered a radical also to the extent that back in the 1890s, late 1890s, along with Ida B. Wells, fought to have anti-lynching laws established back then, but didn't happen. But he was very, very, very active in civil rights and social justice. And he, I guess when he became a bishop in 1924, he became more of an administrator, and his activism kind of slowed some, but he was an extremely articulate orator. And in 1906, when the Niagara movement was having its second meeting in Harper's Ferry, W.E.B. Du Bois asked him to deliver the keynote speech. And I would assume that Dr. Du Bois asked him to deliver that keynote speech because he didn't want to have to come behind him because he was that strong of an orator. So those are my reflections on your question.
So I want to highlight there, as I read The Pilgrimage of Harriet Ransom's Son, and as I read other works that was written by by Bishop Reverdy Ransom, and including Dr. Dickerson, I'm currently finishing up a master's in historical theology with the Nazarene Theological College in the UK. And so my field of interest has been on Bishop Reverdy Ransom and Bishop Richard Robert Wright Jr.
Right.
And so Dr. Dickerson has been able to help me to track down all of these not in print books so that I can kind of fill out my research. But you are absolutely correct. I don't think enough people know exactly how profound Bishop Reverdy Ransom was when it comes to the civil rights of African Americans. We know about Martin Luther King. We know about Malcolm X. We know about all of those leaders. I'm at the office, so you hear people trying to get access into the building. You hear about all of these regularly featured persons. However, not enough people know about Bishop Reverdy Ransom and what he did in his early ministry in Chicago. Dr.
Right.
Dickerson, would you like to respond to that?
You asked Mr. Ransom, and he answered eloquently. And so thank you, Mr. Ransom, for particularly highlighting Bishop Ransom's, then Reverend Ransom's speech in 1906 at Harper's Ferry. Du Bois talked about it a great deal in his own writings, and that it set the tone and laid the foundation for the Niagara movement being the forerunner of the NAACP. So in many ways, Reverdy Ransom had his hand at least conceptualize the programmatic thrust that would be adopted by the NAACP, founded a few years after his Harper's Ferry speech. Let me just identify just three areas where Bishop Ransom is significant, and these three areas by no means exhaust the range of importance that Bishop Ransom had. He and Du Bois were the first African Americans who noticed the importance and relevance of Gandhi to the African American struggle for freedom. Both in 1921, Du Bois, who was editor of The Crisis, the magazine of the NAACP, and Reverdy Ransom, who was editor of the AME Church Review, wrote articles about Gandhi saying that African Americans needed to take a look at this colored man, this colored Messiah. That was Ransom's term for him, and the methodology, the moral methodology that he was deploying in undermining the rule of the British in India. And he wrote an article about Gandhi as the colored Messiah. And he and Du Bois, same year, really represent the first group of African Americans who would talk about the relevance of Gandhi to the African American struggle in the United States. Others would follow: Mordecai Johnson and Benjamin Mays and William Stewart Nelson and Howard Thurman. They would follow in succeeding decades, but Ransom and Du Bois played a foundational role in articulating what moral methodology would underlay the emergent civil rights movement. A second area is Ransom's role. He and Bishop John A. Gregg and others comprised a delegation that went to Cuba in 1939 to reestablish the AME Church in Cuba. And they spent a number of days there, traveling not only in the Havana area, but traveling into the Santiago area, the area where the vast majority of African Americans, Afro-Cuban slaves had been in bondage. And they returned to Havana, had a service, and evangelized and drew a number of Cubans who made a commitment to join the AME Church. This transnational, this international thrust of Ransom is something that should be especially noted. And thirdly, and again, as I said, these three things that I've mentioned don't exhaust the roster of Ransom achievements, but the third area that I'll talk about, which is the topic of this podcast, of this discussion, is the singular importance of Reverdy Ransom in pioneering the social gospel in the United States. This is not just in African American history, this is in American history. He came along in the late 19th century where more and more clergy, Walter Rauschenbusch and Washington Gladden, were talking about the importance of churches focusing their attention on the impact of industrialization upon Black workers, white workers, and the role that industrialization was playing in creating the phenomenon of poverty. And Ransom was quite astute in noticing the importance and taking note of the importance of the church as an institutional voice to address the issue of poverty and all of the attendant urban ills that afflicted American society as a result of rapid industrialization. We mistakenly start Ransom's foray into this area with his founding in 1904 of the Institutional Church and Social Settlement. Very important event and very important benchmark event in Ransom's life and in the life of the social gospel. Ransom was the first clergy, white or Black. Most clergy, most reformers started settlement houses, and though they often had a religious basis, they were separate institutions. Ransom intentionally founded a church whose mission was the social gospel. I mean, that was the whole reason for the institutional church and social settlement being founded. And he gave his first report to the 1904 General Conference. The denomination itself provided the funds for Ransom to purchase the old railroad chapel, a very impressive physical plan. It's a church building, but it also had other facilities attached to it, where he and Emma Ransom began a whole range of programs for women, for children, and for men. Sewing classes, recreational activities for children, kindergartens, etc. But as I mentioned, this was not his first foray. When he was a young minister, shortly after he accepted his call to preach, Bishop Payne moved him to out of the Ohio Conference to the Pittsburgh Conference, and his first appointment in the 1886 Pittsburgh Annual Conference was to the Manchester Mission on the north side of Pittsburgh. And it was there that he and Emma Ransom noticed the need for social service, because their parsonage was in a dilapidated structure in an alley. And he saw all of the people who were trapped in those urban pathologies. And it was there in Pittsburgh in 1886 that the idea for the social gospel germinated in Ransom's mind. The second, and Mr. Ransom, you mentioned this earlier, and this is very important, and I thank you for mentioning this. When he became pastor of Bethel Church in Chicago, one of his members was Ida B. Wells Barnett. And in fact, Ida B. Wells Barnett joined that church because Ransom was the pastor. She had heard of his social gospel reputation and wanted to be a part of the congregation that he pastored in Chicago. And with Ransom's urging and with his support, and this is over the opposition of some members of the congregation at Bethel Church in Chicago, Ida B. Wells Barnett inaugurated the first kindergarten among churches, white or Black, in the city of Chicago. And she did that in partnership with Reverdy Ransom. So my point was that even before the Institutional Church of Social Settlement was established, Ransom already had this social gospel consciousness, which came to fruition with the founding of the Institutional Church and Social Settlement. One other point. In 1912, Ransom was elected as the editor of the AME Church Review, and he lived in New York City. And while editor of the AME Church Review, he and Emma Ransom established another church, St. Simon the Cyrene. And that was a social settlement church mission where he ministered to persons who were alcoholics, persons who were prostitutes, persons who were unemployed. And that church's mission, its whole reason for being, was this social gospel outreach. So even as a pastor at a mission in Pittsburgh, even as a pastor of a large metropolitan church in Chicago, and then after leaving Bethel and with the permission of his bishop, established the Institutional Church and Social Settlement, he went on to be elected a general officer in the AME Church in 1912 as editor of the AME Church Review, and started during his incumbency as a general officer to St. Simon the Cyrene Church in New York City. And after he was elected a bishop in 1924, he became the symbol for other clergy in the AME Church in inaugurating in the urban areas, north and south, east and west, social settlement, social gospel programs in their church. Ransom became, by this time, the paradigm for that kind of ministry.
So I want to again highlight, and I want to recognize that Dr. Christina Dickerson cousin, Bishop Elizabeth Ann Henning Byfield, and Dr. Marcus T. Henderson Sr., they're amongst the other viewers who are watching live. They are general officers and the daughter of our panelist, Dr. Dickerson, and one of our bishops. They are watching live, enjoying this, as Dr. Henderson said, wealth of AME information. I want to point out before we've been having some connection issues, but Ariel, you seem very stable now. So I want to make sure I get you to comment in just a hot second. Again, Ariel Arnett is the great-granddaughter of Bishop Benjamin Arnett. And so I want to comment on what Dr. Dickerson said. Ariel Goddard, who did his research on Bishop Reverdy Ransom and Bishop R.R. Wright Jr., and their social gospel ministry development, Bishop R.R. Wright served as an assistant to Bishop Reverdy Ransom when he pastored in Chicago. And after he could no longer stay in Chicago, Mr. Curtis Ransom, it was the help of Bishop Arnett who helped to get him out of Chicago and to land him into the First Episcopal District, if I got my points of connection right. After he could no longer continue to serve in what is now the Fourth Episcopal District, Bishop Arnett helped him land him somewhere else. But Ariel Goddard points out people suffered from both the need for spiritual discipline and the modernization of society, which Black people were discounted and left out. To Bishop Ransom, this meant that the church should be available for the use throughout the week and not just for Sunday service. It should provide food, clothing, shelter, education, activities, childcare, and the like for the marginalized in our communities. And so when we talk about your grandfather being the father of the Black social gospel movement, it's interesting that we're going to the General Conference in just 5 months to be held in Columbus, Ohio. It was 100 years ago when we were last in this city, and more than 100 years ago when we was last in this city of Columbus, Ohio, holding a General Conference. But it was people like William Gladden, who pastored a church in Columbus, who was a few white men to identify and recognize the influence of Reverdy Ransom and the Church of Social Settlement as one of the sparks of the anvil that made the AME Church stand out brightly, in that the social gospel movement was more akin to white people in the industrial age of the North than it was to the poor blacks moving from the South in hopes of a better job. It was your grandfather who saw the need to create programs and church ministries that met their physical, spiritual, social, and physical needs. I can only imagine how that makes you feel, that you are a product of such a historical figure.
Well, I'm glad that Dr. Dickerson brought up about the institutional church and social settlement, and it was revolutionary. However, it was not widely accepted within the AME Church. And Dr. Dickerson, if I'm wrong, tell me. And he had his distractors back then.
Absolutely.
And one of the reasons why he was able to establish that was because of Bishop Arnett, who helped the make those funds available for him to establish. Now, Bishop Arnett was his mentor and his protector within the AME Church. And when you mentioned in 1904, he left Chicago and he settled in New Bedford,
Massachusetts
for a short while, later going to Boston. But yes, that institutional church was very much revolutionary at that particular time. And once again, right along with him was Emma Ransom, who worked, side by side with him. One unique story was that when he was in Chicago, he did preach against what they call the policy people. Well, people that don't know what policy is today, which most people don't, it was really the numbers game back then, where people of his congregation would use the small amount of money that they have to play the numbers. But then he was preaching against this type of activity. And when he did that, he drew the ire of the people that were in charge of that numbers racket, and they planted a bomb in his office and tried to kill him at that particular time, but they were unsuccessful. So, he stood in the front and he was fearless. He was not afraid of pretty much anything back at that time. But thank you for bringing up about that institutional church and social settlement, because it was a forerunner for African Americans when it comes to a social settlement. And if I'm wrong in saying this, Dr. Dickerson, I know you will correct me, but that was probably the first Black owned and run social settlement in the United States.
So before we lose the flower among us thorns, I want to go ahead and recognize Miss Ariel Arnett, the great-great-granddaughter of Bishop Benjamin Arnett. Ariel, will you please just chime in? Tell us your connection. Tell us what you know and what you've learned and gleaned from your family about Bishop Arnett. And then I want you to jump in with question number 2 by telling us about, in your opinion, Bishop Ransom's greatest contribution to American society.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Ariel Arnett. My grandmother her name is Karen Arnett Yarbrough. So she's the only surviving granddaughter of Bishop Ransom. She just made her 85th birthday. When the pandemic took place, I've been doing genealogy research for over close to 25 years. And so Mr. Ransom, Bishop Ransom's grandson, reached out on Ancestry for direct descendants of Bishop Arnett, and it took off from there. So my connection is, as Mr. Ransom mentioned, Bishop Arnett was a mentor to Bishop Ransom. Benjamin Jr. and Reverdy C. Ransom were in the same divinity class, class of 1886 at Wilberforce University. So they were friends, and I feel like we are family. So that's my connection. My great-great-grandfather owned Wawa Chimney Corner up until his death until 1906. And that's when Bishop Ransom left, and he was pastoring at other churches, which was mentioned before. And so I think he came back to Wilberforce in 1933. So you have two notable AME bishops that own the same estate to Wawa Chimney Corner. And then the second question, you said, what is my opinion about Bishop Ransom's greatest contribution to American society? As Dr. Dickerson mentioned before, Bishop Ransom and W.E.B. Du Bois, I don't know if a lot of people knew that Du Bois, I think back then it was a challenge to find teaching jobs. So he found a job at Wilberforce. And so I just feel as if, for me, just doing genealogy research, I am the one, we have a foundation page for the Emma or the Bishop Reverend D.C. Ransom and Emma S. Ransom Foundation. So every Tuesday I post historical events that Bishop Payne, Bishop Ransom, Bishop Chappelle, and Bishop Arnett. But I feel that his biggest accomplishment was the Niagara Falls movement, including W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells, that if without Bishop Payne or Bishop Chappelle or Bishop Ransom, Bishop Arnett, they were the forefathers for the civil rights movement. You know, a lot of the times we will refer to the civil rights movement starting like in the mid 1950s, 1960s, and that's not true. It took place in the mid 1800s, even before then. So I feel that that's Bishop Ransom's biggest contribution that I really am fascinated with. So,
Ariel, I want to ask you, do you know Bishop Benjamin Tyrwood Douglas?
Yes, he's a long distance cousin. He is. We haven't met, but so with me, I started my research, I want to say when I graduated in 2003. And so the African American Museum connected me with relatives. So he's one of the relatives that I was connected with over 20-something years ago.
Bishop Douglas is the 7th bishop elected within the Pentecostal Churches of Christ. I once knew the founder. Right. He died during the pandemic, Bishop J.D. Ellis. Bishop Douglas served as his assistant and one of the secretary generals for the Pentecostal Church of Christ, which is headquartered in Cleveland, Ohio. And so I would love for you two to be able to connect. He has been a great source in sharing information with me. There's also a layman out of Metropolitan AME Church whose name escapes me in the moment. But after we end this podcast, I'll make sure that we will get this connection going. Ladies and gentlemen, we are having a very lovely conversation about the legacy of Bishop Reverdy Cassius Ransom, who, in my opinion, is the father of the Black social gospel movement, one of the fathers of Black social change, and a historical figure within the life of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to come back and continue this conversation.
Praise him with a violin.
Welcome. I'm Alphonse Allen, the senior pastor of Allen Temple AME Church.
And I'm personal injury attorney Blake Maislin, partnering together to bring you the Allen Temple broadcast.
Allen Temple, reaching the city one soul at a time. Every Sunday morning at 8 on the CW Cincinnati.
And now we're inviting you to join us.
Every Sunday morning at 8 on the CW Cincinnati.
So we're back with Mr. Curtis Ransom, the grandson of Bishop Reverdy Ransom, Dr. Dennis Clark Dickerson, who is the professor of history at Vanderbilt University, and we have Miss Ariel Arnett, who is the great-great-granddaughter of Bishop Benjamin William Arnett, and we're talking about the legacy of Bishop Reverdy Cassius Ransom. So I want to ask the panelists and whoever feels who wants to jump in, please go ahead. How important is the preservation of Tawawa Chimney Corner and the foundation bearing Ransom's name to a collective ethos of Black history? And I think I will direct this to Mr. Ransom, since you are the president of the Bishop Reverdy Ransom and M.S. Ransom Foundation.
Well, yes. For those people viewing this podcast, Tawawa Chimney Corner is a residence in Wilberforce, right on Brushrow Road. It's right down the street from Central State University, and used to be right down the street from Wilberforce University until Wilberforce moved across on the other side of the highway. But and then Ariel, you correct me if I get these dates that are not correct, but I got in 1877 that Bishop Arnett purchased Tawawa Chimney Corner and named it Tawawa Chimney Corner. And he resided there until 1906 when he passed away. Then between 1906, various people lived in Tawawa Chimney Corner, and then Bishop Ransom moved there in 1933 when he became over the 3rd District. And he lived there from 1933 until 1959. And his wife, Emma Ransom, passed away in 1943. And then he remarried again. Bishop Ransom remarried again in 1944. And his 3rd wife, Georgia Myrtle Teal, lived there with him until he passed away. And then she lived there until 1959 when she passed away. And then the property went into someone purchased it, and primarily was used in a residence because it's a large structure, 3 stories with a basement and a main room and an upper room, and it has 6 bedrooms in it. But then and someone purchased it, and they were using it to rent rooms out to some of the college students. So, but I always remember that house because it sat back off the road, and it was a great big circular driveway. And as I mentioned before, I was 10 years old when I came to Tawawa Chimney Corner for Bishop Ransom's funeral. But I still remember that house back until when I was about 5 years old and extremely young. And it was, to me, it was a huge house, and really is a huge house today because it's a little bit under 5,000 square feet. So that house was being used by college students. And then in a conversation with a niece of mine that I asked, and she grew up in Xenia and grew up right there in Wilberforce because she was constantly at Tawawa Chimney Corner in Wilberforce. Yvonne Ransom Mizell, she now lives in California. We had a conversation in Washington, D.C. back in 2016, and I asked her the question. I said, well, whatever happened to Tawawa Chimney Corner? And she said, you know what, I'm going to do some investigation. And she did, and she found out that it was purchased, but then that the property was sitting in probate because the person who purchased it passed away in 2014. And I said, well, I wonder if there's an opportunity that we could bring this property back into the fold. And it was a question And we kept following up to see if we can find an answer to the question. And we got in contact with a realtor back there. But to make a long story short, I was able to purchase that property back into the Ransom family in 2017. So in purchasing it, I said, okay, what are we going to do with it? And to me, the most natural thing was to form a family foundation. And that foundation had to be named after Bishop Ransom and Emma Ransom. And as I always said, she was always right by his side whenever he went to the various cities that he was a pastor. So we formed the Reverdy C. and Emma S. Ransom Foundation. And the foundation was primarily to preserve and continue the lifelong legacy and vision of Bishop Reverdy C. and Emma S. Ransom by restoring and maintaining their home to Wawa Chimney Corner as a conduit for advancing civil rights and social justice initiatives of African Americans. So that's primarily our mission statement, and to establish, to restore the house. And we've been blessed that we were able to have the house put on the National Historic Registry. And once we compiled all the information and all the facts, the state of Ohio and the National Park Service placed that house on the National Historic Registry. Of all the houses on the national of historic stature, only 2% deal with African American heritage. So we were happy and notably should be included of that status because of Bishop Arnett and Bishop Ransom. And in establishing the foundation, we started to solicit or apply for grants to help restore the house. And as of today, we have received 2 grants from the National Park Service of a total amount of $1.3 million to restore that house. Well, it kind of knocked my socks off when we applied for the first grant that we was able to receive the initial grant for $475,000. And that was in 2022. And that particular year, the National Park Service only granted 10 grants nationwide, and that was one of them, which tells you the power of the story that was told about that house. And then the preceding year, we applied for another grant in the amount of $750,000. And once again, we received the approval of that grant. So right now, we are working on restoring the house. And actually, we had a call yesterday with Ariel and Dr. Dickerson participating on that call to set up a timeline to help restore that house. And the initial phase will be the exterior of restoring the house, and then we will work on the interior. And we hopefully will have that completed here within the next several years. But it was all about a blessing and a divine, I guess, nature of just how all this all came together. And for me, it was something I had to do because as I said, when you're a 10-year-old kid and you're hearing all these great stories about Reverdy Ransom and Emma Ransom, you had to follow through with that lifelong legacy to preserve that. And there's a couple things I want to mention about Emma Ransom that a lot of people
I want
aren't
to
aware
jump in real quick before you go there, Mr. Ransom.
Okay, sure.
There's a question from Dr. Dickerson cousin, and this is a question that I have had myself. And thanks to the now connection with Ariel, she can kind of be my go-between between you and the foundation. What documents did Bishop Ransom leave behind? Where are they? What should an interested researcher start? Where should an interested researcher start? And before you answer that question, so I was a student at Payne for my MDiv when the house was vacant, and the librarian at the time at Payne shared with me that there was a person who kind of owned the house and rented it out to students at Central State, kind of, chopped up the rooms and made living spaces out of it. And that he found books that was designated to the library of Wilberforce and Payne Theological Seminary, but decided to throw those books out. And that Friends for Payne, which is an organization, found some of those books and turned some of them over to the university and the seminary. Can you speak to that and Dr. Dickerson cousin's question?
Well, Dr. Dickerson, I want to let you answer that question. I know a lot of this material is scattered between Payne, some in Wilberforce, and then I understand Emory University has.
Yes, they do. They have. I can say that Emory University, which is one of the universities that I reached out to, so Drew Theological Seminary in New Jersey and Emory University has a rather large file. I had to pay a freelance photographer to shoot what was in the boxes at Emory University, but I'm still waiting on the person to get me the material. The university has been working with me because this was for my research for my master's degree in historical theology. So I can attest that Emory University has a rather significant file that may or may not include audio or video, as well as Drew Theological Seminary, who through the United Methodist Historical Preservation sent me a rather large USB file that I keep on my person at all times of several of the unpublished and published but not in print works of Bishop Ransom.
Now, we did find an audio in Payne Library, which is the Bishop Reverdy C. Ransom Library. We did find an audio, and I will make sure both of you get a copy of that audio.
Please.
He delivered a speech in 1950. So he was 89 years old, and he still had a strong voice at 89. So I will get you a copy of that over to both of you.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Dickerson, can you answer Dr. Dickerson cousin's question? Now I'll put it back on the screen. Perhaps not about what was left behind in the house, but where should an interested researcher start when investigating the life of Bishop Ransom?
I won't repeat what Mr. Ransom has already said in terms of the district materials which are located at Wilberforce University Library, as well as the library at Payne Theological Seminary, and the two repositories that you have mentioned, Dr. Davis. In addition to that, as you know, for 12 years, Bishop Ransom, then Reverend Ransom, was the editor of the AME Church Review. And the AME Church Review is on microfilm, and a number of libraries have copies of that microfilm. Reverdy Ransom was a prolific writer, and he had the ability to attract some of the best intellectuals, the best commentators to write for the AME Church Review. So from that period, that World War I, early 1920s period, you can find material. In addition, because Reverdy Ransom was involved in a multitude of organizations, a range of organizations, the records of the NAACP and other Black organizations would be helpful. You can't just go to one place. They are scattered. What is needed is a directory of repositories and a directory of venues where you can find materials. For he was a bishop, an active bishop, for over 30 years. And so he is found, and his speeches, his commentaries are found in AME conference minutes. And there are disparate copies in a number of different locations, some in private hands. So that's one group of materials. There are innumerable materials concerning Wilberforce University and the launch of Central State that would be in state records and in state archives. So there is no one place that has all of it. It would be great if all of it can be aggregated. If not, certainly a directory of materials and the location of those materials in various repositories could be compiled.
I thank Dr. Dickerson for those persons who are candidates for the office of historiographer for the Connectional AME Church. This would be a wonderful project for them to take on the task of recording where these information are located. For my own self, Dr. Dickerson cousin, I can share with you, if you're just interested, the things that I have found in my own research. I want to go to our question.
Dr. Davis, can I follow up on something that Mr. Ransom has spoken to so eloquently, as well as Miss Arnett? Mr. Ransom is right on point in reminding us constantly of the large personality of Emma Ransom. Mm-hmm. There is a colleague at Princeton University, Judith Weisenfeld, who wrote a book about the African American YWCA chapter in Harlem, and that chapter owed its existence to Emma Ransom. And one would get the impression that book by Judith Weisenfeld is a biography of Emma Ransom because she's replete throughout that volume. She was involved in the YWCA during the time that Reverdy Ransom was editor of the AME Church Review and lived in Harlem. So she carved out for herself a separate persona. It complemented that of her spouse, but she herself is a towering figure in African American women's history, particularly in the YWCA movement. And Miss Arnett, I just wanted to buttress a point that you made about the importance of Bishop Benjamin Arnett. I have a special affinity for him because both of us were born in Western Pennsylvania, he in Brownsville, and so that's always aroused a special interest in me. But in the early 1800s, around 1803, 1804, Ohio, because it wanted to discourage Blacks who had been manumitted from slavery, mainly in Virginia, from coming. They wanted to prevent those Blacks from coming to Ohio. So they enacted in the legislature what was called the Black Laws, and it meant exactly what it said. They were anti-Black laws. Well, when Benjamin Arnett was elected to the Ohio legislature, repeal of those laws in the state of Ohio, another important cornerstone in the civil rights struggle that owed singularly to Benjamin W. Arnett. And it was also Arnett who had enacted in the Ohio legislature the bill that established and funded the combined Normal and Industrial Institute at Wilberforce, which later separated from the university and became Central State.
Dr. Dick, one quick note about Emma Ransom and the YWCA in Harlem, New York City. She was on the board of the Metropolitan Board of the YWCA, first African-American woman to sit on that board. And in 1918, helped raise $100,000 to have that YWCA built. It was called the colored branch of the YWCA in New York City. And then about 15 years ago, I had an opportunity to meet the executive. She wasn't the executive, she was the assistant executive director of, it was called the Emma Ransom House. And I had an opportunity to meet the assistant director of that house. And she told me the story about how she would bring all the ladies down once a month and to tell them the story about how that YWCA came about and that Emma Ransom was a mentor to her. Well, the lady that told me this story her name is Dr. Dorothy Height. So you can see the impact that Emma Ransom had on African-American women in this country.
That is amazing.
This is a story Dr. Height told me personally. So
that is amazing.
Great.
Yes.
Ariel, I want to, I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Mr. Ransom?
No, that's it. That's it. I had to tell that little story.
That is purely amazing, because those of us who know about the women, the Black women leadership in America, Dr. Dorothy Height and the club that she founded, the organization that she founded, that is amazing that she would tell you about your grandmother. I can only imagine what that makes you feel like on the inside to hear such another historical figure tell you about a historical figure who happens to be your grandmother. Ariel, I want you to talk about, if you can, because we're at the point where we're talking about the various aspects of Bishop Ransom's life. But since I have the great-great-granddaughter, Bishop Benjamin William Arnett, I want to ask you, can you talk about his leadership for a moment? Bishop Arnett, and I want to point this out for those who are watching, Bishop Reverdy Ransom in 1940-1941 became the first African-American ever to be appointed to a parole board. Bishop Benjamin William Arnett became the first African-American to ever serve as a foreman for a jury. And so, and in the state of Ohio, Bishop Benjamin Arnett was the first African-American member of the Ohio legislature. So, Ariel, can you share with us some information about your great-great-grandfather in that regard?
I can. As Dr. Dickerson mentioned, he was born and raised in Bronzeville, Pennsylvania. At the age of 2, he was mute. He didn't talk at all. So his older brother kind of helped him learn how to speak. He had an accident when he was in his, I think, early teens or late teens. He was working on a steamboat and he had a wound in his leg, and so infections kind of settled like in his the bloodstream, and so he had his leg amputated. The town of Bronzeville raised money to have for him to have a prosthetic leg, and so he started, because in the ministry, we started off as a principal in Washington, D.C., and then eventually he met Frederick Douglass. So Frederick Douglass and Bishop Payne were mentors to Bishop Arnett. As you mentioned before, he was one of the first Black state representatives for the state of Ohio. He also, it's called the Arnett Law, where it desegregated the schools in the 1880s. And I wanted to touch back to question number 3, the significance of Chihuahua Chimney Corner. Tawawa Chimney Corner was owned by a slave owner, Philip Piper, where he migrated from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Parish County. And so he came to Wilberforce in the pursuit of buying land. And so Bishop Payne said, that's fine. Are you bringing a wife? And so he said, yeah. But the story behind that, Philip Piper had relations with one of his slaves, Nellie Aber Bailey Piper, and they had 7 kids. And so Bishop Daniel Alexander Payne said, you cannot come to Wilberforce and not free this woman and her children. You have to marry her. So they got married in Philadelphia, and they ended up migrating to Wilberforce. So actually, Philip Piper, a white slave owner, owned Tawawa Chimney Corner. His youngest daughter, Ella Piper, and Bishop Arnett's oldest son, Alonzo T. Arnett, got married, and they had 2 daughters. And so it was, even though Bishop Arnett purchased the home, it was kind of gifted to him. So that's the connection. I'm a descendant of the Piper and the Arnetts, and then he mentored Bishop Ransom, and it's just phenomenal how the families are coming connected. Another thing I wanted to point out was that a lot of people are not aware that Central State University is the first original Wilberforce University. The state came in and they built an industrial school, I think in between 1939 and 1941. And the AME church said, we'll make a deal with you. You have to go according to the church's, bylaws. They didn't follow the rules. And so there was this big uproar. So the AME church said, you know what, we're going to just buy land right around the corner from Central State. Central State was not accredited university until like the early 1960s. And as you mentioned about the archives, I had the opportunity to go into Wilberforce. Like you said, when I do my research and I post every Tuesday, Emory has documents, Central State has documents, Wilberforce has documents, Yale University has documents. Mr. Ransom can tell you, I live genealogy. I live it every week or every day. I'm looking up something new about each bishop and what I can contribute. And this story needs to be told. A lot of people are not aware and woke about the contributions that Bishop Ransom, if you mention Emma C. Ransom, they don't know her contributions toward the suffrage movement, how involved she was. But, back then, Black or African American women were, frowned upon or jaded. They were not treated even as a second-class citizen, So I'm grateful that Mr. Ransom has been a mentor to me, and now Dr. Dickerson and Yvonne, as Mr. Ransom mentioned before, that we can all work together to make this come true, make this vision come true.
Again, we're having a wonderful conversation here with the grandson of Bishop Reverdy Ransom and the great-great-granddaughter of Bishop Benjamin William Arnett. And so I want to again thank these individuals, including Dr. Dennis Dickerson, who took time from his work and his writing. Dr. Dickerson, you are doing a new project that's going to be featured, I believe, on Mahatma Gandhi. And so I'm excited to see that come into fruition. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and I'm going to ask our final question before we depart. Again, we're talking about the legacy of Bishop Reverdy Cassius Ransom, who is, in my opinion, the father of the Black social gospel movement, social activist par excellence, and one of those premier persons who have helped to organize the Black mentality of social change and social activism within the life of the Black church, particularly the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Recently, God opened the door for J.P. Moore Mortuary and Cremation Services to expand into the Madison, Florida area. allowing us to provide stellar yet affordable services to families in need, families who are looking to honor the life of their loved one in the customs and traditions of our cultural experience. J.P. Moore Mortuary and Cremation Services offers compassionate and courteous service with unmatched satisfaction and a professional staff that can serve your family in a difficult time with dignity. The top 11 reasons why families call J.P. Moore Mortuary and Cremation Services are that we offer funeral services, cremation services. We have an on-premise chapel. We have J.P. Silk Creations, our on-premise florist. We offer grief counseling. We have 24-hour on-call service, at-home arrangements, out-of-town services. We have digital casket display. We offer air flight shipping, and we have reasonable and competitive pricing with a complimentary notary public. Spreading sunshine at the sunset of life. J.P. Moore Mortuary and Cremation Services. The mortician who cares more.
Again, we're back with Dr. Dennis Dickerson, Mr. Curtis Ransom, and Ariel Arnett, and we're talking about the legacy of Bishop Reverdy Cassius Ransom. And I want to thank these individuals who have made it possible for us to be here today to talk about this towering figure. Now, in light of Bishop Ransom, I asked this question to everyone to whom I've had the privilege of having on this podcast. What does unholy silence mean to you? What does unholy silence mean to you? So I'm going to start with Dr. Dickerson, and if you can tell us, what does that mean to you?
When we see injustice, when we see wrong, when we see that persons are hurt and harmed and exploited, when we say nothing, that's unholy silence.
Ariel, what does unholy silence mean to you?
I would have to agree with Dr. Dickerson that I feel like with the pandemic, that should have been a wake-up call for everyone. And that if you don't stand for yourself or for something, you won't stand for anything at all. You're going to fall. It's going to crumble. And so you look at today, I think, Brandon, you and I are around the same age. We are the next generation. We are the ones who have to step forward. We are the ones who have to educate our children that comes after us about their history, where they derive from, and the struggles that our ancestors went through to get us where we're at today. So if we don't continue to be a pillar of faith and advocate for equality and civil rights, then we have failed ourselves and we have failed our ancestors that came before us. So that's what it means to me.
Mr. Ransom.
Dr. Dickerson so eloquently responded to that. Silence when you know wrong is not acceptable.
Yes, sir. Again, I want to thank these individuals for taking the time out of their busy schedule of being with me today. This has been an exciting conversation to talk about one of my heroes who has helped me to awaken what it is God has called me to do as a pastor and minister within the AME Church. As a student at Allen University, Payne Theological Seminary, United Theological Seminary, and now Nazarene Theological College through the University of Manchester, I have taken my interest in Bishop Reverdy Ransom, Bishop Joseph Gomez, and now Bishop Richard Robert Wright Jr., and have expanded my own personal consciousness as it relates to what the Black church means in terms of social justice and social change. And with the help of people like Dr. Dennis Clark Dickerson, I've been able to put that information into perspective, to take aspects of their writings and their preaching and their thinking and to tailor it into a perspective that has helped me to identify what it is I want to do as a called pastor and minister within AME Church. As always, I'd like to leave with you just a final thought to kind of help shape where we are as we move forward in the future. As we come to the end of Black History Month, this is by no means the end of Black history. We have come to accept that Black history is 365 days of the year. And so I want to encourage people to continue to share as Ariel, Arnett, and Curtis Ransom is doing on the Bishop Reverdy Ransom and Emma S. Ransom Foundation Facebook page. They continue to share weekly these historical facts about persons who have contributed so much to Black society. So continue to read more. Before I share my final thought, I want to highlight Miss B.A. Johnson. Miss B.A. Johnson is a steward at St. John AME Church in Huntsville, Alabama. And she is the author of not one, but 2 children's books, to which I have purchased now for the young people at Warren AME Church in Toledo. Sassy uncovers Peter Allen's secret, and Sassy discovers the AME Church. And so I want you to go and Google her. She is available to be found on Instagram under her name, B.A. Johnson. You can find her as well as on Facebook. Again, she is a steward at St. John AME Church in Huntsville, Alabama. Her pastor is the Reverend Dr. Maurice Wright, who serves as our international director and president of MCAM. Please find B.A. Johnson and get these 2 books, these children books about the AME Church and Bishop Richard Allen's son, Peter. Get these in the hand of your young people. But as a final thought today, I want to share with you a quote from Bishop Reverdy Ransom that was shared in one of his Episcopal addresses. While heaven is our final goal, our chief present concern is with life on this planet and human relation in our present society, to the end that the kingdom of God may be established among men. I see little hope for the survival of the AME Church or any other distinctly religious Negro denomination if we do not so apply the gospel of Christ as to make it a vital force in the life of society. While the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and the Urban League may argue, petition, protest, and appeal, we are clothed with authority to declare, "Thus saith the Lord." My name is Dr. Brandon Davis. I'm the founder of Content Writing Service and Conversation with Faith Leaders. It has been my pleasure to have with me today Mr. Curtis Ransom, the grandson of Bishop Reverdy Cassius Ransom, and Miss Ariel Arnett, the great-great-granddaughter of Bishop Benjamin William Arnett Jr., and the celebrated historian and professor, Dr. Dennis Clark Dickerson, who is the Lawson Chair Professor of History at Vanderbilt University. Please continue to encourage our young people, to encourage members of your family, to investigate your own history. Learn who you are, learn where you come from. COVID-19 is still a reality, so I want to encourage you, if you have not gotten your shots, get your shots updated, continue to be protective and proactive. And again, this has been Conversation with Faith Leaders, and I hope to see you again as we continue to have more intriguing and intellectual conversations about those things that are of social concern. God bless.